Hey parents, is your child skipping words or guessing words while they're reading? Well, you're not alone, and there's a fix. I'm Amy from Omnia Education, and in this video today, I'm going to be walking through why kids often skip or guess words while reading, what not to do, and strategies for how to fix it. There are a variety of reasons as to why children might be skipping over words when they're reading or why they may be guessing words when they're reading. The first one being that they may have not developed strong enough phonics skills or decoding skills. And so we really want to make sure before we are introducing decodable books, for example, where they're reading full sentences, we want to make sure that we've checked to see that our children know all of their individual letter sounds. And we've also checked to see if they are able to blend simple CV or CVC words. We also want to make sure that the text that we are giving them in a decodable text, for example, is not using words and letter sounds that have not yet been taught. So for example, if there is a word like ship or chip, but they haven't been taught those digraphs yet, we shouldn't be showing them those words because that could be a good indicator as to why they are skipping or guessing over those words. And so we need to go back to working on our phonics skills and decoding skills first before continuing on with that text. Another reason could be because of the strategies that they have been taught with and they've gotten used to using. So even when I was in teachers college, they were teaching us to use strategies that just don't work, and it's not how children are taught to read. We were taught to use these cueing strategies for children, like look at the picture and guess the word, or what's happening in the picture, or look at the first letter and try and guess the rest of the word. And all of those things are not reliable and they are not effective ways to teach children how to read. However, that is still the case in some contexts, in some classrooms. And so we really want to make sure that our children are focusing on the words and not using the pictures to help guide them and to guess what the word might be. Another reason that's very common is also when kids feel rushed or nervous, they sometimes tend to skip over words or guess words. They're trying to read really quick and build up that pace and fluency, and so that often is why they might skip or guess through those words. So we really want to make sure we're creating a calming space for them, letting them know that they can take their time to read and decode the word, that there doesn't have to be any rush, and reading at a pace that's comfortable for them. Guessing is a problem, especially when we are working with kids who are learning how to read. Number one being it masks the gap in decoding and phonemic awareness. And what I mean by that is, for example, let's say a child is reading and they're reading through some words that maybe a couple of the words in the sentence sound like they struggled a little bit, but they got the word. And later we find out that they were just guessing based on the shape of the word, based on looking at the picture or whatever the case may be. That's hiding gaps that we need to be aware of to help bring in some intervention strategies and help them really learn how to actually decode those words. Guessing also leads to a lot of reading comprehension problems. They're not able to understand fully what's happening in the text, and that can lead to a lot of frustration as they're reading, as well as when they finish reading, they're not entirely sure what they've read because they're filling in words based off the first letter, they're guessing words, they're skipping over important parts of the sentences. That causes a lot of frustration for the kids, especially when they're in those beginning stages of learning to read. Guessing words and skipping over words also prevents that growth in fluency. It really interrupts the pace of their fluency as they're not actually stopping to learn the word that will help them be more fluent later on as they're reading. So overall, guessing and skipping over words can create these really unfortunate habits that are sometimes really hard for kids to unlearn if we don't catch it right away. So here's what we don't want to do when we are trying to fix this problem. We don't want to say to kids, just guess, or we don't want to say, what do you think makes sense here? Or look at the pictures. We don't want to rely on all of those different things. We really want to focus on the words and helping them break apart those words to learn them. So we don't want to be throwing in these other strategies, trying to think it's helping them when it's making them rely on everything but what they should be focusing on. Another thing that we don't want to do is correct every single word immediately, because that can lead to frustration as they're reading if we're stopping them every few words or every few sentences and correcting. So we want to pick out maybe the words that we think they could learn the easiest, and we can save the other ones for later. What I like to do is maybe every couple sentences, if there's a word that's incorrect, or if it's one that they keep repeatedly saying incorrectly, maybe we'll stop and focus on that one. But the other words that that maybe we can save till later, that's exactly what I'll do. I'll write down the words that they're struggling with, that they've skipped, that they've said incorrectly, that they've guessed. And when we're finished reading, we'll get out the whiteboard and we will work through each of those words, kind of going through in a more controlled environment where it's not interrupting their flow of reading and it doesn't feel so targeted, interrupting them all of the time. And I find that to be really helpful and effective because that gives us time to break down the different parts of those words, to practice our decoding, looking at all of the different sounds, and we're not rushing to get back to the book and back to our next sentence. So we've covered a lot of things we don't want to do, but the key that you're probably waiting for is what do we do instead? So the first thing we can do is prompting that sound by sound blending. So for the words that we are stopping and helping them decode, that we are kind of stopping their flow of reading to go ahead and fix in that moment, we can prompt them to break apart the sounds in that word. And often when we are doing that and prompting that, that can help them read through that word and then continue on their sentence. So we can prompt that by doing finger tapping. So for example, on our arm or our hand, you can tap out the sounds. You can also have an alkaline box beside them to use that they can use counters and work through using the alkaline box to help them. So you can model that and prompt them to really work on that sound by sound blending. And with that, we can model that decoding strategy. So if they're stuck on a word or if they've skipped and you've said, hey, wait a second, can we go back to this word? You can model a couple of times thinking out loud that decoding strategy. So you could say, that's interesting. Let me look at the different sounds. I see g, I, if I blend those together, I have gr, grim. And so you can model that decoding so they can see what that looks like when someone is thinking aloud through how to read and break apart those sounds in the word. Another thing that you can do that is so important is using decodable text, not leveled readers. When we're thinking of our leveled readers, that has a whole jumble of words and with sounds that they may have not learned yet. And so that's an automatic kind of setting them up for failure, that they're going to be guessing and skipping over words that we know they haven't yet been taught. When we're using decodable books, they are organized by skills and sounds and blends, digraphs, letter sounds that they have already learned. We can pick based off of a scope and sequence with our decodable books. And so we want to pick decodable texts that have sounds in them and words that they have already learned to make that part easier so they're not guessing and they're using those decoding strategies to use those different sound combinations to read and break apart the sounds of those words. So basically, we are really wanting to find text that match the phonics skills they know. Something else that we can do is reinforce the phonics instruction. So continually reviewing our phonics through a phonics scope and sequence, going back and working on different sounds or blends or digraphs that are causing them some issues. So for example, maybe going back to review and practice some more of their short vowel sounds or a specific blend or a vowel team, really reinforcing that phonics instruction, and then we can bring that back to the text they are reading and implement some of those things they just reviewed. And finally, celebrate their effort as well as the correct strategies that they are using, not just picking apart all of the things that maybe they didn't do. So for example, saying to them, I love how you just sounded out that word all by yourself, or I love how you were decoding that, or I love how you took your time to read that word instead of skipping over it. So giving them praise for using those correct strategies and putting in all of that effort will automatically just want them to do that more and more because they're feeling good that they're doing something correct on their own using those correct strategies. So some tools and tips to support integrating these strategies to kind of get away from that guessing and skipping over words. I've mentioned the alkaline boxes. You can grab a free template here, and I also have a video where I walk through how to use them, but this is really effective strategy that they can have beside them to help them use as a kinesthetic multisensory tool to have next to them when they're learning to read. Also using their hands and their bodies to do tapping out the sounds. Any of those decoding practices and strategies that they can be doing on a regular basis can be very helpful for them to then bring back those strategies and use them when they're reading. So as you can see, guessing is a habit that we want to get away from, and we can with the right tools, supports, and strategies put in place. If you found this video helpful, please go ahead and hit the like and subscribe button. You can go ahead and grab your free copy of the Alkanen boxes if you would like to use that in supporting your child through these different strategies. And I will see you here next time.